Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Nasr. I'm the CEO at Acoer. We're a software development company focused on building solutions in healthcare and blockchain. I'm formerly Chief Software Architect at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and quite a lot of experience these days building healthcare solutions and very much thinking about how we can create innovation through computational trust and use of blockchains and technologies such as that. I'm delighted to have Nick Lambert, CEO at Doc, who's also in this space. I think Doc has been around since 2017 and doing a lot of interesting production quality work in healthcare and in supply chain, in pharmaceuticals, and some other industries. And we're going to get into this area of practical usage of blockchain in healthcare and life sciences and delve into it a little bit. That being said, Nick, welcome. I would love to get a little bit of background introduction from yourself.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jim. Yeah, my own background is kind of started out really in the technology space, kind of started with IBM and kind of Sanmina SCI on the kind of large scale manufacturing side. Long story short, probably about 2011, I moved into the decentralized space. So using a decentralized technology to do different things. In the case of the company I was at then called MaidSafe, it was really about decentralized storage. But what that did for me, Jim, was it really opened my eyes up to the power and also the challenges, of course, of decentralized technology. So its ability, as we'll get through today, the ability for it to enable, in some cases, for the individual or the entity to control their own information without needing to do it through a third party. And of course, there's certain kind of cost and security benefits for decentralization. I was there for about 7 years as the Chief Operating Officer. And then for the last over 3 years, I've been the CEO of Doc. Doc is also in the decentralized space, but very much focused on decentralized identity, like you said, and also within verifiable credentials, i.e. giving entities and also individuals the ability to make claims or attestations about things that can be instantly verified using kind of basically digital fingerprints to prove something to be true. So that has lots of really nice offshoots and use cases. We'll talk a little bit of how they affect things like healthcare and pharmaceuticals and supply chain today. So,
excellent, Mike. Really appreciate that. So I do want to maybe just, before we get into some of the other topics, just maybe delve a little bit into this decentralized identity space. It is very hot. It's been hot, I think, or at least on paper, for a number of years. And one of the use cases that many people claim is foundational and perhaps fundamental using blockchain. What I really want to know, though, is where do you think we are today? What is the practical, the real experience right now, circa middle of 2023? And, what is actually working, what's not? How do you see that?
Yeah. In terms of it's a lot of this stuff is actually working. When I say stuff, what I mean by that, I should be more specific. What I mean is that the technology behind it is in place in many cases, not in all cases, but some companies are further along than others. But there's an awful lot of working solutions out there. But what we haven't really seen yet, I don't think, or they're slightly hidden, unless you're looking for them, you don't see them, Jim, is what you kind of see as mass adoption, by which I mean like millions and millions of people using decentralized identifiers. That's something that we're not seeing, and I think that's not down to the technology not being available. It's that it just takes time to educate and to amend existing processes and systems to enable it to work with what already exists. There can be sometimes in different fields regulatory requirements that need to be fulfilled, and obviously incumbent companies as well wanting to kind of not want to let the grip go in the market. So there's a whole load of things like that are happening, but I think there's quite a few exciting things that are starting to come along, Jim, that make me think that we are moving into that era of mass adoption. There's a lot of regulation starting to change within the EU. And we're starting to see some pretty large companies rolling out their own decentralized identity programs for their employees in many cases and for their customers. And I think we'll start to see those become publicly known, and also that's going to turn the tide, I think, through really 2024.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do share your optimism, about some of the things that are, I think, triggering perhaps regulation, but also I think recognition by enterprises that they could do decentralized identity, and even if it's internal, help with some of the friction and inefficiencies that they have, even across their own kind of landscape, even if not outside of that, and certainly in the world of healthcare, I think this idea that you could use verified credentials and DIDs in a way to help, if nothing else, portability of your patient information and your health information, allow you to have a little bit more control over how and with whom you share it. I think that all echoes. Let me ask you a question. So I know, our experience, also having done some work in this DID space, decentralized identity, that one of the challenges is actually around which standards that you follow. And there's, I think, about over 100 working DID methods as example. So how do you see interoperability? Like what has been your experience with interoperability, and how does that translate to like actual consumer usability from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a slightly missold concept. I think, like, we speak to a lot of companies, Jim, and we use the W3C, the Web3 consortium, the kind of organization started by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, and that would seem to me to be maybe the kind of, I'll call it leading standard, but the one that we're most familiar with and one we've aligned ourselves with. And I think amongst companies that we speak to in any sector, there is an expectation there that if we have this Web3 consortium and someone else is also working to that standard, Jim, you mentioned that you work with Hedera and your platform, that there's an expectation that if you were also following that standard, everything would magically work across all our systems. And that's not the case. And so I think what standards are doing is setting the groundwork for the future, making sure that they are, it's not necessarily that they're interoperable today, but they're not going to be difficult to get working together. And I think that that's the real power of standards, but there is still quite a lot more work to be done to really give that true flavor of interoperability of a user or an organization being able to use multiple different platforms, different blockchains, whatever it might be, and have their identifiers or their credentials work across all of these platforms. That's something that we're still working toward that doesn't exist, but there is a lot of groundwork being laid that will enable that to happen in the years ahead.
Yeah, I like that, and you're very much right. It's just what I think of as rubber hits the road is a real problem for developers, builders like us, because just because the standards may imply that they work together, the reality is that the underlying methods and how to implement it don't. And I think that's perhaps a lot of the work that you do, and that the usability, where you seems like everything is working seamlessly, but in reality there's a lot of kind of work that you have to do to make that look seamless.
It is, yeah, it definitely is. And I think the other thing, just quickly, Jim, is that it's, if you try and even develop, like the base standards exist, but they take a long time because there's lots of different very smart people that are all working with different ideas about how things should be done, and that kind of corralling process takes time. And it's a good thing that it takes time, because it means that a lot of the blind spots, or all the blind spots, are for the most part ironed out. The issue is, of course, like companies like Doc and others, you want to move really quickly. You want to start bringing advanced features to your customer base, and there are not standards for that. So because it takes 4 years or whatever it'll take to get there. So you kind of have this where the core is there, but then people are running off wanting to do different things at different speeds, and that can make it a little bit tricky. But yeah, I think that the building blocks are there for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's really a testament to us all in this space thinking long to keep building and build the infrastructure for, future, I guess, accelerated adoption, because without that, it's just theoretical. That being said, though, let's kind of get back to the larger, I guess, what I think of as the so what for blockchain, and in particular, with this topic in mind around life sciences. So kind of where do you think, and I know, having read up and spoken to you before, that you do some work, or the company does, around supply chain and tracking counterfeit assets and counterfeit medicine as example. So tell me about kind of where do you think the reality is right there, from your perspective, on use of blockchain, generally speaking, in life sciences, but also specifically around some certain supply chain use cases, including counterfeit medicine?
Yeah, I think it has the power definitely to revolutionize the way that companies work. And of course, I mean, one of the powers of blockchain specifically is it can enable consortia to work together in a way that nobody is necessarily controlling all the information. You have multiple different entities that each are inputting to effectively a blockchain being a ledger, a kind of a statement of truth, if you like, and the fact that no one company or one entity is able to control, manage, and amend that ledger is extremely powerful, because it means that there's a data structure there that everyone can trust. And then once you have that in place, there's quite a lot of different things that you can start to do. And so you can start to have like really kind of traceable supply chains. So we all start to care a lot more about, not only where are the medicines being made, but where are the ingredients and the practices being used to obtain those the ingredients that make up the pharmaceuticals. Where are they obtained? What are the companies supplying that material? Like, do they treat their employees and staff fairly and things like that? And so you can start to use public blockchains and also ones that potentially are controlled by consortia, private ones, that can really help manage that information and let buyers of these pharmaceuticals, whether that's the kind of retail or wholesalers, really understand the complete picture of the supply chain, who made what and when, where was it made. And all of that is put in this blockchain structure that's immutable, meaning it can't be changed or altered. And that adds a lot of, that transparency of the supply chain is a very, very powerful thing, and enables companies that don't necessarily know each other particularly well to be able to work together in a kind of cohesive manner.
Yeah, I agree with you. So you raised an interesting little point that I'd like to maybe delve into a little bit more. You mentioned consortia and this idea of using a public blockchain and possibly using maybe more of a private one, or perhaps a hybrid where you have certain transactions off the chain and some transparency and broadcast through the chain. What do you guys do? What does Doc do? Where do you see this going? I personally have strong opinions, about really very hard leaning into public blockchains and using that transparency, using tokenization, as a means of as one of the means of transparency. But really interested in how you guys go about doing this.
Yeah, we're very much, our mindset is also a public chain. Because I think, and the fundamental reason for that is, like, today we have this what I call the Web 2 world, or the kind of existing like centralized world. We very much live in a world of data silos. So quite often data is not able to speak to data that exists within different entities, or sometimes silos even exist within the same entity within different departments. And I think by having something like a private chain, and by private chain, meaning that only certain people can join that, and potentially only certain people can actually see the contents of that chain, that is getting us back into the siloed approach that we have today. And we know that's not a great approach, because now we have to try and build things to enable people to get into different data silos. And I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests that having a more open data model is much more effective. So even looking at other sectors like open banking, where a lot of work has been done to try and enable this data to be known across different banks, well, let's not silo it at all. Let's start at a position where everything is open from the start. So I'm on the same page as you, Jim, that we're very much advocates of public chains. And when we're talking about public chains, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone can look at a chain and understand exactly who everyone is. That's not really what we're talking about here. But what it does do is it means that the information is there that can be analyzed and available for companies to look at, and it really does open us up from these silos that we exist in today to a kind of much more kind of sharing environment.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Now, as a little aside, I know obviously we're in this larger crypto space. One of the things that really, to me, we don't necessarily in the larger context understand this yet, or not really articulate well enough. But this idea of traceability, you mentioned it several times, in the context of your work and medicine and things like this, but it's extremely powerful. And it's something that actually, I think of it as a Hawthorne effect, that, and the net of it basically is that when you know you're being watched, you tend to be a good actor. So even as example, even in the scenario of the FTX implosion and the whole Sam Bankman-Fried thing, and where did these billions of dollars of basically crypto go? Their reality is, and we've seen this with by the way, with Bitcoin and even back in the day with Silk Road and the various other kind of scams. Not that Silk Road was a scam, but many scams have happened. Is that even if billions of dollars go missing, because of that traceability, because of that public kind of footprint and the thumbnails, it's actually extremely difficult to do anything with that digital with the digital assets, because you're not going to be able to spend that. And if you want to transfer it, it's traceable. If you want to exchange it to, like, for instance, US dollar, you have to go to some kind of a centralized exchange that's highly regulated, has KYC and AML, that know your customer, and anti-money laundering. So even though there's still a lot of noise about scams, and for good reason, this traceability angle, the immutability angle, and the fact that it is public and there is not one leader node that can manipulate, like the system logs, if you like, that is a huge thing. I think we're really just the beginning of understanding the implications of that, and I think this is one of the areas where people like yourself, myself, and me actually building our audience here in this group can really go and impute this idea to various use cases that we have, maybe a little bit more garden variety, in the context of patient engagement or clinical research or patient recruitment, but really emphasize you can basically show your homework, you can show compliance, you can show that you're a good actor, and you can do it efficiently. You can actually gain these efficiencies. But anyway, I won't go into too much. It's just an interesting topic. I will ask you though, now as you go down this decentralized public path, there are definitely some implications around this, right? It's not work as usual or business as usual. So tell me about your experiences here. Like, what are some implications of having decentralization like this? What impact on collaboration, as example, impact on efficiency? What have you seen?
Yeah, very good question. I suppose there's quite a lot to probably try and keep the answer fairly kind of brief. I think there's some of the, I guess, kind of barriers is maybe part of the question there. Maybe tackle that first. It's a very different mindset, as you know, Jim, and you've probably come over this learning curve, of course, as well. But when you're used to things working in a centralized fashion, moving to a decentralized way feels uncomfortable. So why, as a company, would I be happy moving from a place where I, as a pharmaceutical manufacturer, I have a garden wall around all my data, and I know what's happening, and no one else does, and I feel comfortable with that because that's the way it has worked for many, many years, many decades. And now you're asking those same companies to actually say, share all this with your competitors, or share some of this information with, so that potentially even members of the public can query this data. They might not necessarily know what it relates to on the chain, but it's publicly there. And that's a great shift, and that just requires like a lot of education and time. So I think that's some of the implications that we would see. The adoption can be slower because you're trying to educate people, and then particularly large companies, as often exists in the pharmaceutical space, they're then needing to try and amend their known way of working their existing legacy systems with decentralized identifiers and credentials and things that they're trying to understand. So that can slow things down quite a lot. But if they do go through that process, what they get on the other side is something very powerful. So they have a situation where potentially individuals can control their own information. So in a healthcare context, that might be their own healthcare records. In some cases, it could also mean in the workforce. So it could be pharmaceutical practitioners who are able to manage their own continuous workforce, their own educational development. They're not, and then they can take that with other employers in the future and share their learnings with them and what they've achieved. So you get that power getting passed back to the individual, and also what you get is a lot less. The infrastructure emphasis is not always now with the centralized company; it's now spread, and so potentially with multiple companies or even entities that are actually running the infrastructure that powers all of this stuff. It's not necessarily just down to one company. So you get tremendous efficiencies there, both in terms of cost saving, administering those systems as well. So yeah, I guess in summary, kind of there are some barriers to adoption, but if they can be overcome, the upside is potentially pretty big.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. So you raise an interesting point, and this is certainly different as part of this. How do you collaborate and how do you effectively decentralize? How do you see, this, I guess, incentivizing different organizations that do work together? Like a good example that comes to my mind, is in the world of clinical research, is that you have typically sponsors for a particular compound, but then they have, they have research organizations that work with, they have clinical research organizations, CROs that do a lot of the work. There's IRBs that do reviews and things. So what do you think? What's a mechanism, for I guess incentivizing in the long term, or even frankly for articulating the costs across these, these different entities that maybe are working together, on projects, but not necessarily as one, as one entity? What are some of the ways that you think this Web3 blockchain world offers?
Yeah, I think, and you touched on it, Jim, when you said about tokenization as well. Like that can be a very powerful thing. And so for the uninitiated, tokenization is almost representing things as tokens, like a Bitcoin or something like that. It could be currency, it could be something else. But these tokens can sometimes have a real world value. So you can take it to an exchange and exchange it into another currency and ultimately get it into cash if that's what you want to do. But they can also, and because of that, they're a great way of passing value around. So you could have a situation where, company A is helping with some research for company B, and as a result, some value is transferred in the form of tokens back from company A back to company A. That can be the types of things that could happen there. You could even have someone like maybe verifying information. So maybe there's some kind of auditor out there who is verifying that a pharmaceutical supply chain. They can query a blockchain and say, actually, look, I'm potentially quite happy with the way things have worked here. It's in line with local regulations, and they can issue out a credential to say, look, I'm giving this my gold stamp. And then anyone else that then comes in and decides that they're wanting to use that supplier, then they can actually know that, look, this has already been verified by this other company. I trust them. And because I'm actually using their verification, I can give them some value. So, and that value can again transfer across in the form of like tokens, tokenized assets, something like that. And so you get this really nice stream of value transfer that goes right around this system. Another example, Jim, could be where I spoke a little bit earlier about how, there might not be today, you might have a large pharmaceutical company that's running all of this infrastructure themselves, paying for all these servers from AWS, Microsoft, whoever. and maintaining all the system with a kind of huge network of system admins and things like that. But imagine their infrastructure was now run by like 50 different entities that all contribute, and and they're actually compensated for running this infrastructure on which all these solutions are based. They are paid in these tokens for running that infrastructure, and they can then decide to take these tokens to somewhere else and exchange that into real world cash and pay their employees with it. So I think certainly, I'm not saying it's the only solution, but certainly having these kind of token economies that typically exist behind Web3 or blockchain based systems, they're very, very powerful and very, very useful.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And to me, again, we could spend an entire session just talking about the so what of a public blockchain versus some other form, and certainly including centralized servers. But this idea that you could essentially issue tokens that don't have to be cryptocurrency, but tokens that represent value, and that token itself is transparent. Its movement is transparent, and so it's not just a transaction or the if you like the signature of the entities interacting, but actually the value that's passed. And that is incredibly powerful. That really, if done correctly, that leads to this idea of democratizing access and really even this concept of doing this kind of work cross borders, because when you look at it in real life right now, cross-border transactions tend to hit a tremendous amount of inefficiencies, if not all out bureaucracy and fraud, and particularly in certain countries, and obfuscation, right, by various entities, government and other third parties. So this really, in many ways, opens up the ability to, at the very least, work ethically or go down the path of working ethically, if not more efficiently, and in a way that helps the underserved to be represented better. So we could literally speak about this for an hour or more. I did have a question though. One of the counterpoints that people bring up is, well, if you go and do this, you go from an efficient platform, efficient in terms of cost efficiency and at least predictable costs on say Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud or whatever, to this blockchain world. Well, it's going to be expensive. The fees are variable. It is extremely high on energy consumption, and things like this. These have come up. From my perspective as a builder, I think that's highly reductive and then a little bit caricature, because that's just describing maybe what's happening with Bitcoin or Ethereum if you're on the mainnet, and also frankly a little bit old. It's a little bit outdated. But I'm interested in what you guys do, in your world, with this to actually counter both the argument but also the actual costs involved in this decentralized approach, and what chains do you use, and what's the impact that your decisions have in terms of fees, economic viability or predictability of fees, as well as energy consumption.
Yeah, certainly energy consumption is a really interesting one. I don't know what you find, Jim, but sometimes we see that I suppose with any kind of media, that sometimes it's the bad media that breaks through, and people have this, we come across it quite often, a very negative aspect of, or a negative opinion about blockchains because they've kind of read about the Silk Road or something online, and they think the whole ecosystem operates like that. And what I'd actually suggest is that there are bad actors, that there definitely are within the Web3 space, but there are probably sufficiently more so in the Web2 space. So I think we just have to assume it's the world, and some people try and scam other people, and that's true whatever sector that you're in. I think for us, in terms of the how energy efficient they are, we certainly are working a proof of stake blockchain. So, and that's not where Bitcoin, which many people will have heard of proof of work, where you're having computers continually try to use a computation hashing power to solve problems just to prove that they've not been corrupted. And we are using to a model of staking where actually the nodes that are on the network are there because they have put up the most stake. They have the biggest skin in the game within that network. And so they're economically incentivized to want to keep that network running as efficiently as possible. And that requires no computational power, really. I think what you do have, though, is you have machines running in different locations, but you have that already today with all the data centers that run. And for the most part, a lot of the infrastructure behind certainly proof of stake chains like DOC, for example, they run also in data centers. So I don't think we're seeing any adversely negative impact on energy consumption. I think it's probably similar. I think proof of work, you could definitely make that argument for, but not within proof of stake chains. I think in the cost thing, what I'd say is that companies are used to working with currency risk all the time. So we all deal with it. If you're working internationally, you also obviously need to hold like a basket of different currencies to enable you to do business. And so finance teams have become very familiar with trying to manage, am I holding too many euros? Am I holding too many pounds? Like, if that changes against the dollar, whatever your home currency is, that there's a risk there. And that exists. That risk can exist with tokens. So, and the solutions are the same as what are employed today. So you can do things like forward buy. You can have futures contracts and things to help mitigate against those types of risks. So I think there are always kind of ways around those types of problems. The other thing that you can also do, Jim, is batch transactions. So everyone has this notion that, like in Bitcoin, for example, you get 7 transactions in a block. I know that's not very much, or Ethereum, it's like 15. But actually what you can do is batch transactions if you have another chain. So you can have thousands and thousands of transactions sitting off to the side and have them referenced with one transaction on a main chain. So you still enable all that transparency and visibility that we spoke about earlier that's so valuable. But in actual fact, the footprint that has on the blockchain is very, very minimal. So that really not only keeps your efficiency up and your scalability, but it keeps the costs very, very minimal. So there's a lot of different ways that we can mitigate. And some of those are things that companies are already doing today. Yeah,
I love that. That's actually a very good point, Nick, in terms of batching. And there are other clever ways of doing this. As example, one of the things that we do is that we use this, what has now become a 4-letter word, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, as an anchor to a data set, like a help data set, a privacy preserved aggregated help data set as example. And then, so that obviously is many, many different transactions and things like this. But then every read as example off of that is a specific, discretely traceable additional transaction that goes, in our case, it goes on a layer 1 blockchain called Hedera, but certainly it could be done on layer 2s. I know you guys work with Polygon. It could be done in aggregate ways. But yeah, absolutely. You can. This is, I think, a lot of this comes down, like you say, to the nuance of how you actually build it, and certainly this idea of if you have tokens, you're working across different blockchains or different token mechanisms, not that different to doing currency swaps and stuff like that. And it just needs to, if you can disassociate, kind of noise from it, it's not that different to normal ways of doing business, with the exception that if done correctly, there is a tremendous amount of transparency, public transparency, and that is different. Most organizations, even if you're highly regulated, don't actually, unless it's done as part of an e-discovery, they really have a hard time showing transparency. So
that's right. Yeah. And it's all auditable. Like you were saying, Jim, it's not even like if something can be brushed under the carpet, because blockchains have this amazing property of being like append only, that you can only add to them, and you can't, unless something really bad happens, they're broken and they're hacked or whatever. There's been very few instances of that. Like the information is there and it can't be changed. So anyone at any point can go in and audit that entire chain or the contracts within it. So it never goes away. It's got it's got the kind of memory of an elephant, if you like, and where today things can be swept under the carpet. So as you say, if we're moving to a world as we should be, where in certain cases we need to be highly regulated to make sure things are done in the right way, blockchain's a really, really good way of doing it.
Yeah, no doubt. And that actually is a good segue for us to talk a little bit about the regulators and regulations. Obviously, we are in life sciences, we're in a highly regulated industry, though, many people think it's by far the most regulated industry. I don't think that's really the case. I think it's not much more regulated, as example, than education even, or construction. So there's a misnomer that, well, healthcare is so different because it's regulated. It really, finance is highly regulated. So I think that should not be a crutch for us doing stupid things. But tell me a little bit about your reflections on where the regulators are. I know you're in the UK, I'm in the US, but so much of this really there's ripple, no pun intended, there's a ripple effect. And as example, just recently with Ripple winning their multi-year, at least the first part of this multi-year kind of fight that happened with the SEC. So tell me about where you see the regulators going, implications on your business and life sciences, and how do you see that kind of maybe evolving?
Yeah, and the regulation, of course, depends, like you were highlighting, Jim, on the jurisdiction in which you're in. So DOC is based in Switzerland because it has a very open and fairly well articulated approach to how cryptocurrency companies or companies with tokens can and should operate and how they should account for things. And of course, that's different in every part of the world. I think what regulators are struggling with is a lot of them are not technologists. And so it's difficult. And it's, of course, good that they have working groups and they try to engage with technology companies in any part of the world. I'm not specifically speaking about the US, the UK here, but just really all across the world. The regulators do start to, because they have to understand the technology before they try and regulate around it. And so, certainly what I'd be advocating for, it's a tricky thing because technology and companies are moving so fast and regulation by its nature is very slow. It's not too dissimilar from standards where, it can be a mistake to move very quickly and have some unintended consequences. So I think it's a very difficult job that regulators have, but I think in certain parts of the world, they're doing a better job than others. And I think that anyone that overly regulates within a certain area, they potentially are going to stifle that whole country's approach and ability to compete within that marketplace, because companies that are in that jurisdiction will simply move somewhere else and start up. And obviously all the ecosystem of funding, educating team members, etc., will basically move over and navigate over to that part of the world. So I do think it's important for regulators to get this right, but also they need to protect people. But I think if they do it in a way that's unclear or unhelpful, I think they will stifle innovation for that industry within their country. And I think that will make it very difficult for those homegrown companies to compete moving forward.
Yeah, you make a very, very good point. I often think of this as, the law of unintended consequences. This over, I guess, exuberance on regulation can, inadvertently lead to, especially, in this case of blockchain-based technologies and tokenization and things, to essentially drain innovation from a country, from a region, from a particular industry. Unfortunately, I think we have seen that, in healthcare in general, not because of regulations around crypto, much more so just in terms of, I think, understood regulations in general, and frankly, a high barrier to entry for many startups and innovators. And then this kind of convenient dance of the cash cows wanting to really keep things exactly the way they are, because for those few, they're making, they're doing really, really well. They're making a lot of money, and it's a nice little kind of it's a Pyrrhic victory, right? For us in the longer term, it's a Pyrrhic victory, but yeah, they certainly feel the benefits. But that being said, again, we can speak at length, many hours on regulations. But let's in kind of closing our conversation, let's put some of these things that we've discussed. For instance, the technology, what we're seeing, in terms of interoperability and standards associated to it, some of the practical implications, tokenization as an example, and also the regulators. Let's kind of bring it in all into this picture of how do you see actually increasing adoption? Like, what are the triggers? What are the specific things that you see in your world for increasing adoption of blockchain-based technologies, particularly in life sciences? And where are you optimistic with that?
I think it's really, there are probably a few different parts, but I think the biggest one for me, Jim, would be around making it usable and understood. So I think sometimes the industry as a whole gets very, like, we all love the technology and we could talk about it all day, but sometimes we talk about decentralization like it's a feature in and of itself, like a big pharma business or a big healthcare company should care whether it's decentralized or centralized. The reality is that they don't. In many cases, they like whatever is going to get them the best margins, or enable them to be compliant. Enable them to be more profitable, and that's what we need to get to. So we need to start making sure that those benefits are understood, and we also need to start making it easier to work with is another big thing. So either from an individual side, like, how do I manage my decentralized identifiers? Do I need to use a wallet? What's a wallet? What's an app? Like, those types of things, we need to make that highly usable. But also for organizations that are trying to integrate what we've built, they've already got like probably millions of lines of legacy code and lots of different things. And now they have this other consideration of, how do I integrate all that with these decentralized technologies? And that's still quite rough. So the technologies have been very well developed and they can work well once you have them integrated. But that step of integrating them is tricky because people don't understand them as well as they understand the world and the technology as it stands today. Things are maybe not as robustly built because they've not been used as many times. Documentation's maybe not quite as clear as it could be. And basically just ironing out all these bugs, it just takes time. And so I think one of the kind of bigger barriers that we see is enabling these systems to work much better together and to do so in a much more quick way. And like I said, it's like kind of educating people on the real world benefits to them as an organization or to the individual. Those are the key things that we're probably not that good at just now. And I think those, if we can address those, I think the rest of it will fall into place. Like all the regulation stuff, that does need to happen. But I think those are probably the bigger aspects for me.
Yeah, no, I love that, Nick. I'm 100% with you on usability, because I think end of the day, when you're dealing with actual users, like you mentioned, you guys have multiple use cases. Really, they don't care. I mean, they don't care if you're using blockchain or Amazon or MongoDB or your homemade Access database, so long as it works, so long as the functionality, that they need, they want is there, it improves their lives, and you are secure, you don't leak their personal information. I think all of the flowery kind of techie things that we put on, is interesting for us, but it doesn't move the needle for them, particularly if it's an adverse experience. But I really love what you mentioned about integration of technologies, these new things that we're building for, if you like, the legacy applications, because it's great for us to have wallets that maybe integrate into the latest iPhone and iOS and things like this. But there are many applications that serve these data sources that maybe are still built on mainframe technologies, or in the case of healthcare, on MUMPS, technology that was inefficient back in the 70s when it was developed, much less 50 years later. But you have to deal with it. We can't just throw our arms up in the air and have a fit that this is not Web3 technology, right? And I think I know from having talked to you before that you've done a lot of work in open source and open APIs and open tech, and that obviously is certainly one kind of key way of going about making your technologies more accessible to other technology developers. That being said, we're just about out of time. I would love you, since you're very insightful, just give me a kind of a closing, a vision of, maybe we're going to get together in 5 years from now. Well, where do you see things?
Yeah, I would like to see things, I mean, within the pharmaceuticals and supply chain side, I think it's just a matter of time. Like I'm obviously pretty biased, as you can probably gather, Jim. I suspect you might be yourself, but I definitely think this is a kind of a wave that can't be stopped, because there's too much investment, there's too much advantages to this type of technology, decentralized technology. People are now demanding that they control their own information. Entities are asking for the same, and rightly so. Like the way that we work today does not make sense. Like centralization as a concept does not make sense. And so like now Pandora's box has been opened, and I think it's just a case of making things happen. And I think in 5 years' time, I'd like to see, I think what we will see is a lot more large scale production use cases happening. Whereas today, what we probably see in the market are lots of pilots that potentially get shelved. I think the reason for that is, like I mentioned at the start, there's regulation happening in Europe where EU member states, there's 27 of those, are legally required, probably by the end of this year, to provide each of their citizens with an identity wallet in which they can have identifiers, credentials, and lots of different things. And when you have 500 million people that are largely very upwardly mobile, they're online, that is a very big groundswell. There's a few other things happening. The US has kind of started to move that way with kind of driver's licenses and things. I think that will start to move in that direction also. And you have large companies like LinkedIn starting to put their kind of learning programs into verifiable credentials and enabling individuals to control these online. So I think all of this groundswell is really just prepping us for, in 5 years' time, really having much greater like mass adoption, I would say, of technology. I think healthcare records is one that I think, particularly in the US, is going to take longer. The technology already exists today for that to happen. But I think the regulation and the complexity of the US slightly fragmented system is going to probably slow that down a little bit. But I think you will see in other countries things like healthcare records being controlled by the individual much, much sooner. So I think exciting times there in the next 5 years.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with you. And again, we can speak about this for a long time, but I certainly believe that there are certain regions, specifically Africa, where if the motivation is there to have healthcare records, quote, on blockchain, that can be done well in a modern way, fast, and adopted way, way quicker than it's going to happen in the US. And I think a lot of it in the US, certainly there are competing interests and conflicting interests and motivations, but that's a topic for another day. Nick, I really enjoyed our chat. I'm sure the audience will find this very valuable and look forward to a future conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.